Two Apache women was found in the cold. The rancher took them in, gave them a shelter they needed. Snow fell so thick that it erased the fence lines and blurred the horizon into a pale gray wall. The wind howled across the ranch, rattling wooden gates and pushing hard against the small farmhouse that stood alone against miles of empty land. Elias Mercer had lived on that ranch for more than 30 years. He had seen dry summers that cracked the earth and cold winters that froze water troughs solid. But this storm felt different. It carried a sharp bite, the kind that sank deep into the bones and stayed there. That morning he had no choice but to ride out. A section of fence along the northern pasture had broken the night before, and some of his cattle had wandered too close to the creek. If they stayed there too long, they could get trapped in the snow or slip on the icy bank. He pulled his heavy coat tighter around his shoulders and wrapped a scarf over his mouth before stepping outside. The cold hit him like a slap. He led his old horse, Ranger, out of the barn. The animal's breath came out in thick clouds, and even Ranger seemed uneasy. Elias patted the horse's neck gently. "Easy now," he murmured. "We won't be long." The world beyond the barn door looked empty and endless. Snow covered everything in sight. The trees near the creek bent under the weight of ice, their branches creaking in protest as the wind pushed them. Elias mounted Ranger and rode slowly toward the northern pasture. Each step was careful. The snow was deep in places, and hidden rocks could cause trouble. He kept his eyes sharp, scanning for cattle, broken fence posts, or anything out of place. For nearly an hour he saw nothing unusual, just white land and swirling wind. Then something caught his attention. Near the line of cottonwood trees by the creek, he noticed two dark shapes against the snow. At first he thought they were fallen branches or maybe debris blown in by the storm. The wind made it hard to see clearly. He narrowed his eyes. The shapes were too still, too solid. He guided Ranger closer, his heart beginning to pound in a slow, uneasy rhythm. As he approached, the wind shifted, clearing the snow for just a moment. What he saw made him freeze in place. They were not branches, they were people. Two women lay close together near the base of a tree, wrapped in thin blankets that were now stiff with ice. Snow had gathered on their shoulders and hair. One of them seemed slightly taller, her arm draped protectively around the other. For a long second, Elias could not move. His mind struggled to understand what his eyes were seeing. Out here, miles from town, in the middle of a storm like this, no one traveled on foot. No one survived long without shelter. He quickly dismounted and hurried toward them, his boots sinking deep into the snow. The wind pulled at his coat as if trying to drag him back. He knelt beside the closer woman. Her face was pale from the cold, her lips cracked. He reached out with a gloved hand and gently touched her shoulder. She stirred. It was the faintest movement, but it was enough. "They're alive," he whispered to himself. The second woman opened her eyes slightly, blinking slowly as if waking from a deep sleep. Her gaze was unfocused, confused. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Elias felt a wave of relief and fear at the same time. Relief that they were alive, fear that they might not stay that way much longer. He looked around. There was no wagon, no horse, no tracks he could clearly see because the snow had covered almost everything. It was as if they had appeared out of nowhere. The taller woman tried to sit up, but her body trembled too much. She held onto the other woman tightly, as though afraid someone might take her away. "It's all right," Elias said gently, keeping his voice calm. "You're safe. I won't hurt you." He did not know if they understood him. Their eyes were dark and filled with both exhaustion and caution. He had seen faces like that before, people who had learned to expect hardship instead of kindness. He stood quickly and led Ranger closer. Time was slipping away. The cold was too strong to waste even a minute. Carefully, he helped the smaller woman first, lifting her slowly. She was lighter than he expected, as if the storm had already taken part of her strength. The taller woman resisted at first, trying to stay close, but her legs gave out beneath her. Elias caught her before she fell. She looked at him with fear, but also with a quiet understanding that she had no other choice. "I'm taking you somewhere warm," he told them softly. He managed to get both women onto the back of his horse, steadying them as best as he could. It was not easy. The wind fought against him, and the snow made every step heavier. The ride back to the farmhouse felt longer than the journey out. Elias walked beside Ranger this time, holding the reins tightly while keeping one hand ready to steady the women if they slipped. Several times, he glanced back to make sure they were still conscious. The smaller one leaned against the other, barely moving. The taller one kept her eyes open, watching him carefully through strands of frozen hair. When the farmhouse finally came into view, Elias felt a small surge of hope. Smoke still rose from the chimney. The fire he had left burning inside would be their first line of defense against the cold. He led the horse into the barn and quickly tied the reins. Then, with slow and careful movements, he helped the women down one at a time. Their legs trembled when they touched the ground. Inside the house, the warmth wrapped around them like a shield. Elias closed the door tightly against the wind and guided them toward the fireplace. The fire crackled softly, casting a golden glow across the wooden floor. It was a simple home, just 2 rooms and a small kitchen, but it was solid and warm. He helped them sit near the fire and quickly fetched thick blankets from a chest by the wall. He wrapped them carefully around their shoulders, making sure their hands were close to the heat but not too close. The taller woman looked around the room slowly. Her eyes lingered on the old photographs hanging above the fireplace, pictures of a younger Elias and a woman with a bright smile. For a brief moment, something in her expression softened. Elias moved quietly, placing a kettle of water over the fire and pulling out some dried herbs and broth from his pantry. He was not a man of many words, but he understood one thing clearly. Survival came first. Questions could wait. As he worked, he could feel the weight of what he had done. The nearest town was small. News traveled fast. 2 Apache women appearing at his ranch would not go unnoticed if anyone found out. Some people might ask questions, others might not approve. But when he looked at them, shivering, exhausted, barely able to keep their eyes open, none of that seemed to matter. The storm outside continued to roar, shaking the windows and covering the land in deeper snow. Inside, the fire burned steady. The taller woman finally spoke, her voice low and rough from the cold. He did not catch every word, but he understood one thing clearly. They had nowhere else to go. Elias nodded gently, though he did not fully understand their story yet. "You're safe here," he said again, more firmly this time. For the first time since he had found them, the smaller woman closed her eyes not from weakness, but from relief. Outside, the wind howled louder, as if angry at being denied. But inside the farmhouse, something had already changed. The ranch that had stood quiet and lonely for years now held more than just one man and his memories. It held 3 lives, brought together by a storm that might have taken them all, if not for one moment of choice in the snow. The first night passed slowly. The storm did not calm down. The wind kept striking the walls of the farmhouse as if it wanted to break inside. Snow tapped against the windows in small waves, and the cold tried to creep in through every tiny crack in the wood. But inside, the fire burned strong. Elias stayed awake most of the night. He placed more wood into the fireplace and checked on the 2 women again and again. He was not used to having guests. Since his wife passed away 5 years earlier, the house had been quiet, too quiet. The only sounds most nights were the ticking clock and the wind outside. Now there was soft breathing near the fire. The taller woman woke first. It was early morning and the sky outside was still gray. She looked confused for a moment, as if she did not remember where she was. Then she noticed the warmth, the blankets, the fire. Her eyes quickly moved around the room until they found Elias sitting at the kitchen table. He gave her a small nod. "You're safe," he said again in a calm voice. She slowly sat up. Her movements were careful, as if her body still hurt from the cold. She gently touched the shoulder of the younger woman beside her. The younger one opened her eyes slowly. She looked weak but more aware than the night before. Elias stood and walked toward them, carrying 2 cups of warm broth. He handed one to the taller woman first. She hesitated for just a second before taking it. "Drink slowly," he said softly. They did not speak much at first. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the quiet sip of broth. After a few minutes, some color began to return to their faces. "My name, Anna," the taller woman said slowly, pointing to herself. Her English was not perfect, but it was clear enough. Then she placed her hand gently on the younger woman's shoulder. "Leela," Elias nodded. "Elias," he replied. There was silence again, but this time it did not feel as heavy. As the morning grew brighter, the storm finally began to slow. The wind softened. The snow still covered everything outside, but the sky looked lighter. Anna tried to stand, but her legs shook. Elias quickly stepped forward to steady her. She pulled back slightly at first, not out of anger, but out of habit. Then she allowed him to help her sit at the small wooden table. Leela remained near the fire, her eyes watching every movement. You rest, Elias said gently. Storm not finished yet. Anna nodded. She seemed to understand enough. Later that day, Elias prepared simple food, bread, beans, and more broth. The women ate slowly, as if they had not had a proper meal in some time. They did not rush. They did not ask for more than they needed. That told Elias something important. These were not careless travelers. They were careful survivors. By the second day, the storm had fully passed. The land outside looked peaceful again, but the snow was deep. Travel would be difficult for anyone. Inside the house, the air felt warmer in more ways than one. Anna began to speak more. Her words came slowly, but she tried. She explained that they had come from far south near reservation land. Supplies had become limited. Work was scarce. They had planned to reach distant relatives in another town before winter became too harsh, but they misjudged the storm. Leela listened quietly, her eyes sometimes filling with emotion. She seemed younger, maybe in her early 20s. Anna was older, perhaps by 10 years. The way she looked at Leela made it clear she felt responsible for her. We walk many days, Anna said softly. Snow come fast. Elias listened without interrupting. He did not ask too many questions. He understood that some stories were heavy and did not need to be forced out. That afternoon, he went outside to check on his cattle again. Before leaving, he told them, door stays locked. Firewood here? He pointed to the stack near the fireplace. Anna gave a small nod. When Elias returned, he was surprised. The kitchen table had been cleaned. The cups were washed and placed neatly beside the sink. Leela was carefully folding the blankets they had used the night before. You didn't have to, Elias said. Anna gave a small smile. You help us, we help. Her words were simple, but they carried respect. Over the next few days, strength slowly returned to their bodies. Leela began walking more steadily. Anna offered to help cook. She moved quietly in the kitchen, learning where everything was kept. The house felt different. There was the soft sound of footsteps, the gentle clink of dishes. Low voices speaking in a language Elias did not fully understand but found strangely comforting. On the fourth day, a knock came at the door. Elias stiffened slightly. Visitors were rare in winter. When he opened the door, it was Mr. Collins from the neighboring ranch. He stood there brushing snow from his coat. Storm hit hard, Collins said. Heard some cattle broke through fence lines, thought I'd check on you. I managed, Elias replied calmly. Collins' eyes moved past him into the house. He noticed the extra pair of boots near the door. The unfamiliar shawl hanging by the wall. Got company? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Elias paused for only a moment. 2 travelers caught in the storm, found them near the creek. Collins stepped slightly to the side, trying to see more clearly. Travelers, he repeated. Before Elias could say more, Anna appeared quietly behind him. She did not step forward fully, but she stood where Collins could see her. There was a brief silence. Collins' expression changed, not openly unkind, but cautious. Storm's no time to be wandering, he muttered. No, Elias agreed firmly. It is. Collins studied him for a second longer, then nodded slowly. Well, roads to town won't clear for another week at least. That's fine, Elias replied. After Collins left, Elias closed the door carefully. Anna had understood enough to know the conversation was about them. Problem? She asked quietly. Elias shook his head. Not yet. But he knew something had changed. Small towns ran on rumors, and rumors traveled faster than horses. That evening, as they sat near the fire, Leela spoke for the first time more than a few words. You live alone? She asked Elias gently. Yes, he answered. Long time now. Leela looked at the photographs above the fireplace. Your wife? Elias followed her gaze. Yes. There was no sadness in his voice, only a quiet memory. Anna studied the room again. It was simple but strong, like the man who lived in it. Everything had its place. Everything had purpose. You are kind man, she said softly. Elias cleared his throat slightly, uncomfortable with praise. Just did what anyone should. But deep inside, he knew that was not entirely true. Not everyone would have stopped in that storm. The days continued to pass. Anna began helping outside, even in the snow. She fed the chickens carefully and thanked Elias each time he showed her something new. Leela repaired small tears in old cloth sacks using neat stitching. She worked with patience, her hands steady now. The house that once felt heavy with silence now felt alive. Still, Elias could not ignore the feeling that eyes in town would soon turn toward his ranch. He had lived there long enough to understand how people thought. But each time he looked at Anna and Leela, sitting by the fire or quietly helping with chores, he felt certain of one thing. Whatever questions came later, he had made the right choice. And as another cold night settled over the plains, the farmhouse stood firm against the wind. Inside, three people shared warmth, not just from the fire, but from something far stronger. Trust was slowly growing where fear had once lived. And though none of them knew what would happen next, they all understood one simple truth. They were no longer facing the winter alone. By the second week after the storm, the snow had begun to melt, but the tension in the air had not. The roads to town slowly reopened. Wagons began moving again. Smoke rose once more from distant ranch houses. Life was returning to normal across the plains. But for Elias, nothing felt normal anymore. He noticed the change the first time he rode into town for supplies. It was a clear morning, the sky bright and cold. Anna had insisted on giving him a small list written in careful letters: flour, sugar, lamp oil. Leela had added thread and needles at the bottom. Only if cheap, she had said softly. Elias had given her a small smile. I'll see what I can do. When he reached town, the usual sounds filled the air: boots on wooden sidewalks, horses tied outside the general store, quiet conversations near the post office. But something was different. People were watching him, not openly at first, just longer looks. Quieter voices when he passed. Inside the general store, Mr. Whitaker stood behind the counter, polishing his glasses. He looked up as the bell above the door rang. "Morning, Elias," he said in his usual tone, but there was something careful in his eyes. "Morning," Elias replied, placing his list on the counter. Whitaker glanced down at it. "Cooking for more than one these days?" Elias did not react. "Guests," he said simply. Whitaker nodded slowly. "Heard something about that?" Of course he had. In a small town like this, nothing stayed secret for long. As Elias gathered the supplies, he could feel other customers listening. Two men near the stove pretended to discuss cattle prices, but their eyes shifted in his direction more than once. When Elias stepped outside, he found Sheriff Bradley waiting near his horse. The sheriff was not a cruel man, but he was cautious. He believed in keeping order, and order in his mind meant knowing exactly who lived where and why. "Elias," the sheriff said, adjusting his hat. "Mind if we talk?" Elias nodded. "Go ahead." They stepped a few feet away from the store. "Folks say you took in 2 women during the storm," the sheriff began. "I did." "From where?" "Found them near the creek. Would have frozen if I left them." The sheriff sighed. "No one's saying you should have left them." But that was not fully true. Some people probably had. "You planning on keeping them there?" the sheriff asked carefully. "They're recovering. Roads were closed. Had nowhere to go." The sheriff studied him. "You know how folks are. They get nervous when strangers stay too long." Elias kept his voice steady. "They're not causing trouble." "I hope not," the sheriff replied, "because if trouble starts, I'll have to step in." There was no threat in his words, but there was warning. Elias nodded once. "Understood." When he returned home that afternoon, Anna could tell something was wrong before he said a word. "You went to town," she said quietly. "Yes." She watched his face carefully. "People know." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Elias admitted. Leela looked down at the cloth she was sewing. Her hands slowed. Anna stood straighter. "We leave," she said firmly. Elias frowned. "Leave? Where would you go? Snow still deep. Road's not safe yet." "We don't want problem for you." Her voice carried strength now. Not fear, but pride. Elias shook his head. "You're not a problem." But outside, the problem was already growing. Over the next few days, small signs appeared. A rider slowed near the ranch fence and stared toward the house longer than necessary. 2 boys from a nearby farm rode past twice in one afternoon, pretending to race but clearly watching. One morning, Elias found his outer gate left open. He was certain he had closed it the night before. Nothing was stolen, nothing damaged, but the message was clear. Anna noticed his silence growing heavier each day. "You worry," she said one evening as they sat near the fire. Elias stared into the flames. "I've lived here long time, never had neighbors looking at me like I did something wrong." Anna nodded slowly. "People fear what they don't know." Her words were simple but true. The next Sunday, Elias made a choice. He rode to church as he always did. He knew people would talk. When he entered, conversations softened. Heads turned. He sat in his usual place, hat resting on his knee. After the service, several men gathered near the door. Mr. Collins was among them. "Elias," Collins began carefully, "we've been meaning to speak with you." Elias looked at each of them calmly. "Then speak." "It's not right what you're doing," another man said. "Letting strangers stay on your land without knowing who they are." I know who they are, Elias replied. 2 women who almost died in the cold. That's not the point, the man insisted. It is to me, Elias answered. There was an uncomfortable silence. Mr. Collins cleared his throat. No one wants trouble, but folks worry. They think maybe it'd be better if those women moved along once they're strong enough. Elias felt something shift inside him, a line being drawn. They will leave when they're ready, he said firmly. Not when fear tells them to? The men exchanged looks. Some seemed uneasy, others dissatisfied. As Elias rode back home, he knew the situation had changed. It was no longer quiet whispers. It was open concern. At the ranch, Leela was outside feeding the chickens. The wind lifted strands of her dark hair as she worked. She had grown stronger, healthier. She looked up as Elias approached. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. He paused before answering. "We'll see." That night, as they ate dinner together, Anna spoke calmly. "If we must leave, we go," she said. "We have walked before, we can walk again." Elias placed his fork down. "No," he said quietly but firmly. "You don't run because people are uncomfortable." Anna studied him carefully. "You sure?" she asked. He nodded. "I took you in because it was right. That hasn't changed." Outside, the wind picked up again, not as strong as the storm that first brought them together, but enough to rattle the windows. The ranch felt different now, not just warmer, but stronger. The next morning, Sheriff Bradley returned. This time he dismounted and walked directly to the door. Elias opened it before he could knock. "We need to talk," the sheriff said. Anna and Leela stood quietly near the fireplace, watching. The sheriff stepped inside. His eyes moved across the room, taking in the simple order of the house, the clean table, the repaired feed sacks stacked neatly near the door. "These the women?" he asked. "Yes," Elias answered. Anna stepped forward slightly. "We not cause trouble," she said carefully. The sheriff looked surprised that she spoke. "I hope not," he replied. He turned back to Elias. "Town's uneasy. Some think you're inviting problems." "And what do you think?" Elias asked. The sheriff hesitated. "I think winter makes people restless. But I also think peace matters. So does doing what's right," Elias answered. The 2 men held each other's gaze for a long moment. Finally, the sheriff sighed. "I won't force them out, not unless there's cause." Relief moved quietly through the room. "But," the sheriff added, "I suggest you keep things calm, no attention, no gatherings, let this settle." Elias nodded. "That's always been my way." When the sheriff left, silence filled the house again, but this silence was different. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence before a decision becomes final. Anna looked at Elias with steady eyes. "You stand for us." He nodded once. Leela gave a small, grateful smile. Outside, the plains stretched wide and open, touched by melting snow and pale sunlight. Inside the farmhouse, something stronger than suspicion had taken root. Loyalty. And no matter how the town watched, Elias knew one thing clearly now. He would not let fear decide who deserved shelter. The days that followed felt heavier than the storm that had first brought Anna and Leela to the ranch. The snow was melting now, and the land slowly showed its brown grass again. Small streams of water ran beside the fences. The sky looked open and calm, but beneath that calm, something else was building. Elias could feel it in the way riders slowed near his property. He saw it in the distant figures who stopped on a hill just long enough to look toward his house before riding away. No one said anything directly anymore, but the quiet watching had become constant. Inside the house, life continued as usual. Anna had started planting small herbs in wooden boxes near the kitchen window. She said fresh leaves would help with cooking and health. Leela had taken interest in the horses. She moved around them gently, speaking in soft tones that seemed to calm even the most restless colt. The ranch felt alive in a way Elias had not felt in years. One afternoon, while repairing a fence post near the road, Elias heard approaching horses. He looked up to see 3 riders heading directly toward him. He recognized them, Mr. Collins and 2 other men from town. They stopped a few feet away. "Elias," Collins began, clearing his throat, "we need to settle this." Elias rested his hammer against the fence and faced them fully. "Settle what?" "This situation," one of the other men said. "People are uncomfortable. They say you're making a statement." "A statement?" Elias repeated calmly. "You're going against how things are done," the man replied. "Strangers come in, they check with the sheriff, they don't just stay." "They were freezing," Elias said evenly. "I didn't stop to fill out paperwork in a snowstorm." Collins shifted in his saddle. "No one questions helping someone in danger, but it's been weeks now." Elias looked at each of them carefully. They're not harming anyone, they work hard, they keep to themselves. That's not the point, the second man insisted again. Elias felt his patience thinning, but he kept his voice steady. Then what is the point? None of them answered right away. Finally, Collins spoke quietly. People fear change. Elias let out a slow breath. Change doesn't always mean danger. The men exchanged looks, clearly unsatisfied, but they also seemed unsure how to push further without looking unreasonable. We just want peace, Collins said finally. So do I, Elias replied. That's why I'm not turning two women out into the unknown. The conversation ended without agreement. The riders turned their horses and left, but the tension stayed behind like dust in the air. That evening, Elias told Anna and Leela about the conversation. He believed in honesty. If trouble was coming, they deserved to know. Anna listened carefully. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she stood quietly for a moment. We do not want you to fight for us, she said softly. I'm not fighting, Elias answered. I'm standing. Leela looked at him with wide eyes. Because of us. Because it's right, he corrected gently. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Bradley rode in alone. This time he did not carry the cautious look from before. He seemed more serious. Elias stepped out to meet him. Morning, Elias said. The sheriff removed his hat slowly. Town meeting last night. Elias crossed his arms. I figured. Some want you warned. A few even suggested we order the women to leave. Elias' jaw tightened, but he remained calm. On what grounds? None solid, the sheriff admitted. Just worry, rumors. Rumors about what? That maybe more will come, that maybe you're encouraging something. Elias almost laughed at that, but he held it back. Encouraging people not to freeze? The sheriff gave a small, tired smile. You know how people think. Yes, Elias replied, I do. There was a long silence between them. The wind moved gently across the fields, carrying the smell of wet earth. I won't force them out, the sheriff said finally. There's no law broken. Relief flickered across Elias' face, but the sheriff wasn't finished. But I can't promise everyone will stay patient. Elias nodded slowly. I never asked for promises. When the sheriff left, Elias stood alone for a few minutes, staring across his land. He had always believed that hard work and honesty were enough. Now he understood something else. Sometimes doing the right thing required quiet courage. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Leela was working with one of the young colts near the barn. The animal had always been nervous, refusing to let anyone saddle him. But Leela stood calmly beside him, her hand resting gently against his neck. She whispered softly, moving slowly and with patience. Elias watched from a distance. Within minutes, the colt lowered its head and stood still. It allowed her to brush its coat without pulling away. Elias felt a small sense of pride. The next day, Mr. Collins returned, alone this time. He dismounted slowly and approached the barn. He stopped when he saw Leela leading the once troubled colt in small circles. That horse never let me near him, Collins muttered. She's patient, Elias said. Collins watched quietly for several minutes. She train him? He asked. Seems that way. Collins shifted uncomfortably. My youngest boy has been trying for months. Elias remained silent. After a long pause, Collins cleared his throat. You think she could show him? It was a small request, but it meant something. Elias looked toward Leela, who was gently brushing the colt again. I can ask, he said. Later that week, Collins returned with his son. Leela, shy at first, agreed to show the boy how she calmed the animal. She did not speak much, but her actions were clear and patient. The boy listened closely. By the end of the afternoon, the colt stood quietly beside him. Collins watched with surprise. Never thought I'd see that, he admitted. Word spread not about strangers or fear, but about skill, about patience, about kindness. Slowly, the tone in town began to shift, not fully. Not quickly, but enough. Some still whispered, some still disapproved, but others began to question their earlier doubts. One evening, as the sun set in soft orange light, Elias stood near the fence watching Anna tend to the small herb boxes. Leela laughed quietly as she walked one of the horses back to the barn. The ranch felt peaceful. Anna walked over to him. Things change, she said softly. Yes, Elias replied. You not regret? He looked at her seriously. Not for a second, she nodded. In that moment, Elias understood something deeply. Standing firm had not divided his home, it had strengthened it. The town might never fully agree. There would always be those who resisted change, but fear had not won. Respect was slowly taking its place. As night fell, the three of them sat near the fire once again. The air was calm. The windows no longer shook with storm winds. The house no longer felt like a place of shelter from cold alone. It felt like a place built on trust. And for the first time since the storm, Elias believed the hardest part might finally be behind them. Spring arrived slowly, but when it finally settled over the plains, it changed everything. The last patches of snow disappeared from the shaded corners of the ranch. The creek that had once been frozen solid now flowed freely, reflecting the blue sky above. Grass began pushing up through the soil, soft and green. The air no longer carried the sharp bite of winter. Instead, it felt fresh, full of new beginnings. Inside the farmhouse, the feeling of change was just as strong. Anna woke early each morning to open the windows and let the cool spring air move through the house. The small herb boxes she had planted near the kitchen window were now growing well. Their scent filled the room when sunlight touched them. Leela spent more time outside than in. She had formed a quiet bond with the animals. Even the shyest horse now responded to her calm voice. Elias often stood at a distance, watching her work with steady patience. He admired the way she never rushed. She understood that trust, once earned, had to be handled carefully. The ranch was doing better than it had in years. The cattle were healthy. The fences stood strong. The barn felt alive with movement and purpose. For the first time in a long while, Elias did not feel the heavy silence that once followed him everywhere. But even as life improved, something else was quietly approaching. One afternoon, while Elias was repairing a gate near the road, he noticed a wagon coming from the south. It was not from town. The direction told him that much. He shaded his eyes and waited. As the wagon came closer, he saw two older men and a woman seated at the front. Their clothing and features were familiar. They carried themselves with quiet strength. When they reached the ranch entrance, they stopped. Elias walked forward calmly. "Good afternoon," one of the men said respectfully. "Afternoon," Elias replied. "We are looking for two women, Anna and Leela." Elias felt his chest tighten slightly. He had known this day might come, but he had not prepared himself for how it would feel. "They're here," he said after a pause. The woman in the wagon closed her eyes briefly, as if in relief. "We have been searching," she explained. "Winter made travel difficult. But we heard they were found near this land." Elias nodded. "They were." He turned toward the house and called gently, "Anna." Within moments, Anna stepped outside. She froze when she saw the wagon. Her hand flew to her mouth. Leela appeared behind her. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Anna walked forward slowly. The woman from the wagon stepped down, and the two embraced tightly. Leela followed, tears in her eyes. Elias stepped back, giving them space. The reunion was quiet but powerful. No loud cries, no dramatic gestures, just relief and gratitude. Later, inside the farmhouse, everyone sat around the table. Anna explained that these were distant relatives who had been searching for them since winter began. Word had traveled slowly, but eventually it reached them. "We have land prepared," one of the men said kindly. "A small house, work ready." Anna listened carefully. Leela held her hand under the table. Elias remained silent. He knew this moment did not belong to him. When the relatives finished speaking, Anna looked at Elias. "You gave us life," she said softly. Elias shook his head. "You were strong already." Leela stood and walked to the window. She looked out at the barn, the horses, the open land that had once seemed like the end of everything but had become something else entirely. "This place," she said quietly, "it saved us." That evening they all shared a simple meal together. There was warmth in the room, but also a quiet understanding that change was coming once again. After the relatives went to rest in their wagon for the night, Anna sat beside Elias near the fireplace. "We leave tomorrow," she said gently. Elias nodded. He had expected it. Still, hearing the words felt heavy. "You helped us when no one else would," she continued. "We carry that always." Elias looked into the fire. "You brought life back to this house," he admitted quietly. "Before you came, it was only walls and memories." Anna smiled softly. "Now it is more." The next morning came too quickly. The sky was clear. Birds moved through the trees. The ranch looked peaceful, unaware of the goodbye that was about to take place. Leela walked through the barn one last time. She gently touched the neck of the colt she had trained. The horse leaned into her hand as if understanding. Outside, the wagon was ready. Anna hugged Elias first. It was not a quick gesture, it was strong and full of meaning. "You stood when others stepped back," she said. He nodded once, unable to trust his voice. Leela stepped forward next. You gave us shelter, she said softly. But you also gave us trust. Elias managed a small smile. Take that trust with you? They climbed into the wagon. As it began to roll away, Elias stood near the gate, hat in hand. He watched until the wagon became smaller against the wide land. The ranch felt quiet again. But it was not the same quiet as before. Inside the house, the herb boxes remained by the window. The repaired feed sacks were neatly stacked. The colt in the barn stood calmer than ever. Every corner held a reminder. Days passed. Town life continued. People spoke less about fear now. Instead, some spoke about the strong young woman who could calm a horse with a whisper. Others mentioned how the ranch had improved that season. Mr. Collins stopped by one afternoon. "Your place looks good," he said honestly. "Feels good too," Elias replied. Collins nodded. "You did right." Elias did not answer immediately. Then he said, "I just did what I hoped someone would do for me." As summer arrived, the ranch thrived. The land responded to care. The animals responded to patience. And Elias found himself standing a little taller. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset stretch across the plains, he realized something important. He had thought he was saving two strangers from the cold. But in truth, they had saved him from something deeper, the loneliness that had quietly settled into his life after loss. They had filled his home with voices, movement, and purpose. The storm that once seemed dangerous had brought something unexpected: connection. Elias leaned back in his chair, listening to the peaceful sounds of evening. The ranch was quiet once more, but this time it was a peaceful quiet, not empty, not lonely, just steady. And somewhere beyond the hills, two women were beginning a new chapter of their lives, stronger because someone had chosen kindness over fear. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the fading sun. Winter had once brought strangers to his door. Spring had carried them forward, and in between, something lasting had been built, something that no storm could ever take away.